She did. And so it will be posted on the CPE website as well as in your Google file folder of your member resources. And again, we're putting it just on the website for transparency. So with that, I will turn it over to Commissioner and President Zarpato.
Thank you so much. Welcome back, everybody. It's great to have everybody with us. Crazy time of year. As always, we appreciate the time you take to spend and engage with us. And as you know, today's work is particularly important because we're going to be moving closer to finalizing the recommendations that surround our work, which is especially important to me as it's critical to help our students have opportunity and access to early post-secondary opportunities. It's also important because we're going to be getting our legislative asks together, and January is not too far away. Before we dig back in, Jason, would you mind to remind us of what we accomplished in the last meeting and give a preview?
Sure, Paul, I'd be happy to. It seems like it just wasn't that long ago that we met, but if you recall, during our June meeting, we spent a lot of time reviewing the stakeholder feedback and working towards refining our set of emerging recommendations. Today, we'll pick that back up, and with our colleague Lauren, we'll set a laser-like focus on further refining those emerging recommendations with the hope that we'll have a pretty solid set of recommendation plan to bring forward to the continuum at its September meeting. No small task, but I know that we are up to it. And depending on our progress today, we may be able to forego a meeting of our work group in September. As a side note, that's something that the Educator Workforce and Diversity work group was able to do and will not meet again until October. To get us started, Lauren, it's my understanding that you met with our thought partner group. Would you like to share an overview of their feedback with us and how it ties into these emerging recommendations?
Yeah, thank you. I'd be happy to. So I'm going to share my screen. So hopefully everybody can now see the list of prioritized recommendations that were sent out as part of the pre-reading. You also should have received in that pre-reading kind of a higher level overview of all of the feedback that we heard from our thought partners. But today just wanted to really focus in on a couple of the key themes that we heard from those thought partners. So just to set a little bit of context, we met with a group of thought partners who had volunteered to be able to offer feedback on the emerging set of recommendations back in July. So that was a conversation with myself and my colleagues at ESG, as well as with Dr. Ellis and Dr. Fraker. And really it was sharing recommendations across each of the three work groups, all of which those of you who attend the continuum meetings or were able to log in were shared at that meeting. It was pretty much an open forum for them to be able to identify which they thought were really strong priorities that the continuum should push on, ask questions, or offer any kind of adjusting feedback. So a couple key themes that we heard in that conversation. First is what we've heard from all of you time and again, is that advising is absolutely critical to increasing not only access, but the success of students in EPO courses. And so you'll see that represented in a number of the different recommendations that we've included here and that you guys have developed. The first one is number 4, around targeting proactive outreach to students and families with a particular focus on those who have traditionally been underrepresented in early post-secondary opportunities. So making sure that every student has early guidance and access to information around those opportunities. The other one where you see advising come through is around number 6. Conversations we've had as a work group and was reiterated by our thought partners is that while advising is important, the capacity to be able to provide high quality and ongoing advising is one of the biggest challenges that we heard from districts and from institutions. And so it's going to be really important to strengthen the partnerships among high schools, districts, institutions, as well as other workforce and community partners to help students and their families make that connection between how early post-secondary opportunities connect with their post-secondary and career plans. And so you'll see those 2 advising recommendations included here. We thought it was important, if advising is kind of rising to the top of the list, that we have multiple recommendations, at least in this kind of prioritized set that focus on that. Second thing that we heard, and again, we heard this from you too, is that it's really important to be very clear and very explicit about the commitment to equity in these recommendations. And so you'll see that again, really throughout the recommendations here. Starting with the first. So the first recommendation that you guys had put together was making sure that we're really looking more closely at data to understand where and why gaps exist in program offerings, as well as we probably could broaden this to look at kind of access, success, completion, credit transfer, all things that we know are important to the student experience in EPO courses. And then making sure whenever we're deciding to target interventions that those are made available to the students and the communities that need them most. And so thinking about how we can pilot certain initiatives in high needs areas. You'll also see equity come through in our second recommendation. So making sure that every student has access to at least one early post-secondary opportunity. So focus on equitable access. You'll see it in number 4, so targeting proactive outreach to students and families, so that focus on advising. Again, the way that we've included it here is focused on historically underserved student communities. And then you'll also see it in number 5. So if you remember in the stakeholder feedback that we presented a couple work group meetings ago, we heard across the board a lot of positive feedback about the state funding for dual credit tuition, as well as the AP exam fee waivers. We heard, again, from the thought partners that we should at least maintain, if not increase, that state funding. And they liked the idea that you all had of including equity grants for low and middle income students and families, recognizing that that often is a barrier for participation and completion. The third theme that we heard was around the focus on access. So I would say out of all of these 8 recommendations, the one that looks a little bit different from the last time you saw it is recommendation number 2. So currently it reads, ensure that every high school student has access to at least one early post-secondary opportunity. You all had originally frame this around participation. So originally it read that we need to set the expectation that every student participates in at least one early post-secondary opportunity. What we heard from the thought partners was that while that may be a valuable kind of aspirational goal, it might be higher impact and more a lever that the state and the continuum might be able to move on if the focus here is on access, recognizing that we have other recommendations around completion and success in those EPO courses. And so here, just wanted to emphasize again, that we've just kind of shifted the focus a little bit here just to access. And then the fourth thing that we heard was they really liked the idea behind recommendation number 8 around creating a online common course catalog that would allow students, families, counselors to be able to see what courses are available and how they transfer to different public and state institutions. And so again, we just heard a big thumbs up from this one, and so wanted to share that with you. Others that I haven't covered yet that are on this list, just want to point your attention to number 3 around providing incentives for teachers to obtain the necessary credentials to teach dual credit courses. We didn't hear a ton of feedback on this one, but generally the group was positive. They did make a slight note, you'll see this in the pre-reading, that we had listed a couple of different ways that we might provide those incentives. You'll dive deeper potentially in some of the breakouts later today if this is a kind of top recommendation, but we listed this might be scholarships, it could be bonuses, it could be loan forgiveness. Generally, the thought partner group said the more we can give teachers those incentives early rather than going the route of something like loan forgiveness, that's probably a little bit more impactful, but generally had support there. And then the next one is number 7. So in investing in expanding early college programs and career academies. This, if you remember, we heard a lot of positive feedback in our stakeholder interviews, heard that same from our thought partners as well. So kept that recommendation there. The only other recommendation from our original list, so we did a little bit of just like tightening and combining from the original list. The only one that we took out based off of what we heard from thought partners was there was originally a recommendation around setting standard eligibility requirements for EPO courses across every district and every institution. We heard from thought partners as well as at the last continuum meeting that might just be one step too far, or maybe not a place where we want to start. So I think that kind of needs a little bit more kind of focused conversation around if that's something we want to do versus do we really value the kind of flexibility of having some local control or for those decisions there. So overall, again, thought partners were incredibly positive about the recommendations that you all put forward. This is really just a kind of tightening and reiteration of what you guys had already presented to the continuum back in June. So with that, just wanted to open up if there are any questions, either in terms of what we heard from thought partners or this list of prioritized recommendations that you see here. Kind of, you guys can have the floor to be able to probe now, and then we'll kind of switch into kind of voting on what we view as the places to start. And so you can feel free to take yourself off mute, drop it in the chat. We can do some teacher wait time, and then if not, pass it on.
Lauren, this is Stacy Bassett with the College Board. There are 3 things I wanted to ask about. If it's okay, shall I address them all? And is that okay, or do you want me to? First, in regard to number 5 and the equity grants, I certainly like the idea of that. I missed the last meeting. Can you tell me a little bit about what those would include? Or have we not gotten there yet?
Yeah, we haven't gotten quite there, but the way that we've seen other states issue equity grants, for example, Washington State, they offer equity grants for target student populations. And so I think it would be up to the state to be able to decide what the focus is here, but generally that is a pool of money that would be accessible to students to be able to cover either the cost of tuition and fees or all of the additional costs of participating, for example, in dual credit courses, so books, transportation, etc. I think this would be a way to really target the use of those funds. So rather than making them kind of applicable to all students, really trying to, based off of the data that we analyze in number 1, say this pool of money is specifically for students whose family income is under a certain threshold, or this is primarily for students of color, whatever the kind of designated student population might be.
Okay, thank you for that. And in number 2, I do think something needs to be said about teacher professional development. To me, that is really a key to overall student outcomes and performance. And I wondered if in number 2, if there is some way to just call that out specifically, something along the lines of ensure that every high school student has access to at least one early post-secondary opportunity, and ensuring that by providing the teacher professional development needed to make that a reality, something along those lines. I do think we need to add teacher professional development if the rest of the group is open to that.
Yeah, I would welcome thoughts. Folks can either put in the chat or feel free to take yourself off mute and respond to that recommendation. I could also see it fitting in others. I think as we dive deeper into number 6 around strengthening partnerships, that one really is about increasing capacity. Professional development, I think, is kind of tied to that increase in capacity, could fit there. Or maybe even in recommendation number 3 around incentives, because that also is about increasing teacher capacity. So kind of folding in the additional training. So not just the financial support, but also the training to be able to equip them there.
Lauren, this is David. I had another thought on number 2. When you look at the data, I mean, it's easy to afford opportunities by just signing kids up for AP. Dual credit's a little more difficult with having to qualify for some of those. Do we need to add some language around making sure support is there when they are given these opportunities? Because the outcomes don't change if we don't have something tied to that preparation, or if it's a co-curricular class that supports it, or some other type of thing. That's one thing that concerns me, that we talk about, okay, we'll give everybody opportunities, but if they're not ready or don't have what they need, because that's probably a lot of the reasons they're not there.
Yeah, I think that's right, and appreciate that feedback. Thoughts from others, either on what
Lauren.
Stacey said. Yeah.
I have a question. This is Jenny Sawyer. I have a question about number 1, and possibly it is included in that, but it has to do with assessment of transition on particularly to second level classes. So, you know, measuring the outcomes of students who dual credit as they move on, like to an English 102, as they move on to from a college algebra to a calculus, and some type of assessment of these students, longitudinal type of assessment of performance.
Mhm.
I know that that continues to be a concern and questions I get from faculty members about performance of students in sequential courses.
Yep, I think that's a good point. Yeah, I wonder if just for this recommendation, so right now it just reads program offerings, and even if I was sharing it to you, I was like, well, that's not quite right either. So I wonder if we can add some additional language there around the broader kind of student experience to speak to that kind of longitudinal benefits and challenges that students face around dual credit. But if we end up choosing this one to move forward to the continuum, I think that's the exact question, diving one layer deeper that we'll want to add to that.
Thank you.
This is Anthony Myers. I think the comments that I've heard, and I'm going to say this, and I'm not going to push for us to go back to the language that we've changed, but I think the problem is the word access versus participation, and even more specifically, what we really want is successful participation in these courses. Looking at data to tell us that the participation is successful. And we all know that successful participation requires the support that David mentioned, and also the professional development that Stacey mentioned. So those are all components to successful participation or some language. So I don't know if we could work in, while I understand why we had to remove that and change that to access, could we still at least acknowledge that, you know, there is an eye on the prize that's greater than just access. I don't know, just thinking out loud.
Yeah, no, appreciate that.
To your point too, Anthony, I think is that when you talk about the 2 component pieces, the other thing to remember today too is we'll be adding a specific action that would align with that that priority. So if we were to change it to ensure that every student has, you said, or somehow we word it with successful participation, we can flesh out what those actions would be in the actual actions that would align with that recommendation. And I think that's where we could get to the teacher professional development and even David's point around the support for students who are taking advantage of the or who are participating in the early post-secondary opportunities, whatever they are. That might help capture that too. And Lauren, we do have a comment in the chat box too.
I don't know if I'm the expert to be able to answer this question. So if others know better than I do, I see Amanda shaking your head. Answer is no.
No, you do not.
That is correct. A master's isn't required to teach AP. And Lauren, that just my third comment was in regard to item number 3. If I'm reading that correctly, it sounds like incentives would only be available to teachers of dual credit courses. I think that needs to be changed to incentives for any EPO teacher. If not, this will certainly put the other EPO courses at a disadvantage. I noticed that in the summary of thought partner feedback, they did mention offer financial incentives to teachers who teach AP and dual credit. I think that should also include International Baccalaureate, Cambridge Advanced. I do know some states that include them all. For example, I know in North Carolina, they give a teacher bonus for all advanced courses and CTE. So I think that has to be broader or else it hurts the other programs.
That's a great catch. We should definitely, broaden, right? We're the EPO group, not the dual credit group. So making sure that we're being expansive. Great. Other questions, thoughts? Yeah, Melina.
I wanted to combine kind of like our data piece with the equity grants. I think we can also be pretty explicit about looking at data around the workforce as it exists now, like gaps in representation to identify equity grants. But I was thinking of like diversity pipelines that exist. Like I did like a quick Google trying to remember an exact model, but like hospitals sometimes will have grants for high school students in like underrepresented demographics so that they can get like leadership or fellowship experience in high school. And I think that like something like that, where they know that it's underrepresented because of data, we can use that data here as well.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation. And to Amanda's point, I think that is a great action step to include
Right.
in some of these, but I think it's a really important point. Yeah. All right. Well, if there are any other questions, comments, feel free to continue to use the chat throughout the rest of this meeting, and we'll monitor if we don't address them during this meeting. We'll make sure to follow up with you. But with that, we'll pass it back to Jennifer to be able to get us started on the next section. I'll stop sharing my screen too.
So Amanda, I'm going to hand it to you to lead us off in the poll, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. So what we're going to do is we'll have the recommendations placed. We know that we can't do all of these with actions aligned to them and be realistic on really moving this forward. We don't want to over inundate those who are interested in policy changes or budgetary requests or just changes overall in the organizations to trying to take them all on. So what we're going to try to do is narrow down just the priorities, initial thoughts around what you see are the areas we need to focus on most. What we'll do is that out of the 8 recommendations that Lauren just reviewed, the changes that you all recommended, we can put that in the notes. So if those bubble up as top priorities, we can absolutely adjust that and then even add the actions in, which would be our next steps of what we would do with those prioritized recommendations. But right now, the first thing we need to do is do a first run of just narrowing down what you see as priority. So Joette is going to put the polling tool up, and you will get to pick up to 4. And what we'll do is once we have that poll, then we'll review. Jennifer will go through what you selected initially. We'll talk through that a little bit. And if need be, we'll have a second run just to make sure people feel good about their selection. And then we'll start to really hash in on the actions. So Joette, if you will.
Could I say,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Amanda, no, I'm not trying to influence votes or anything, but I just want to point out number 2, there's an existing dual credit scholarship program that provides 2 courses to every student and funded out of lottery proceeds and has been running for the last 4 or 5 years. So in terms of moving the needle, if our target is 1, that perhaps there's other things that are of a higher priority, since that's more or less being addressed in terms of funding.
Sure.
Now, what's going on at each school may be a different issue.
Got it. Thank you. And also Dr. Glass made a comment as well, if you'll notice in the chat. He just said on the equity grants font, just in case you guys aren't able to see it, we need to be cautious about targeting or excluding any constitutionally protected groups or identities if federal and possibly state funds are used for this purpose. There exists a long and complex set of legal precedents regarding affirmative action efforts and what can and cannot be used in targeting funds. For example, it's problematic to include race. It is less problematic to use poverty or regions of code. We need not get into those details now at this level. I think just as these recommendations are operationalized, it is something to consider, and I completely agree. And we have dealt with that for a long time. It's really difficult to work with OCR, Office of Civil Rights. And so I appreciate that point being made as well. So thank you. And Joette. Okay, so you will get to select 4. And let's see how this works. I am not able to click on those. Oh, there we go.
This is a dumb question. Do we just click on it?
That's what I was trying to do. Somebody has figured it out. So
Just click on the box. Click on the boxes that you want.
I don't see it.
I'm not getting it either. It went away.
But somebody is obviously able to vote.
Yeah, there should be a little
I just
box.
clicked on the box. It popped up and I'm just clicking on the boxes. I didn't have to do anything.
So I clicked on 4 of them and hit submit, and then it went away and you guys got really excited. So I'm just wondering if it's only good for one. Sorry.
I was able to do one as well, so.
Did you resend it? I don't have it. I don't know where.
Yeah, I don't either. Oh, co-host, okay.
So mine went away before I
It went away,
finished.
yeah.
Same here.
Yeah, it was
Technology is great when it works.
It went away while I was clicking.
listed as a co-host is unable to vote.
I see.
So I don't know, Joette, if you're able to switch, like me and Lauren and Amanda and Jennifer don't need to vote, but if the other co-hosts could be switched out of co-host mode to be able to vote.
Yeah, that must be it. That's why I can't vote.
Yeah, and for those of you who lost your box, I don't know if this is just because I am a co-host, so have this option, but on the bottom, like Zoom list of things you can click on, like chat or participants, I have a poll button. Sometimes that repopulates it if you have that as an option. But
So I'm just able to see the results of what looks like maybe 2 people.
Me too. It's not letting me select it.
4. Yeah, it's up to 4 people.
So it looks like the polls closed before voting was complete.
Yeah,
We have that problem here.
yeah, I was in the middle of voting when it closed.
So I'm wondering if we should, if you feel comfortable, and if you don't, we can figure out another way, but just put your top 4 in the chat, if that's easier. And if you weren't able to vote, and we can add that to it. Lauren and Brianna and Jen help me keep my eyes on it so we can add it up appropriately. If it dumped you or did not give you a chance to vote at all, I apologize, guys. You never know.
You want to try to relaunch this?
It'll clear, it would clear the results. So I wonder, maybe I can share my screen to show you the recommendations, which will give you a number, and then we'll just put our top 4 in the chat. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
Let's
All
do
right,
that.
let's do it.
Okay.
If I can share my screen. Here we go.
To clarify, everyone's doing this even if their votes got counted. in
Even
the
if
poll.
they, yes.
Yeah,
let's
we're just going to
give
start over
everybody.
from scratch if that's okay.
Yeah.
Maybe. Joette, are you able to share your screen? It's not, for whatever reason. Oh,
There we go.
There you go.
Right.
It's your email, Jen.
nobody wants to see that. It's not that exciting.
Not unless there's something good.
I don't think so. I could even stop sharing that. Come on, nothing's working. Sorry, you all.
if I can pop it up,
Okay.
just since I already have it up.
There we
Perfect.
go. Thank you. Top 4 numbers.
It's like a Monday. Yes, so top 4. Has everyone put in their selection? Are we waiting on anyone? Yes, David, I think we can absolutely do that. Okay, if anybody else was looking at the polling, so I show, let me take this down. I show that our top would be 3, 6, 2, and 4. 3, 6, 2, and 4. And it actually came out pretty cleanly. So
Good.
3, provide incentives for high school teachers to obtain necessary credentials. 4, I'm not going in any order here. Target proactive outreach to students and families who are traditionally represented in early post-secondary opportunities. 6 is strengthen partnerships among high schools, institutions, and the workforce. And then 2 is ensure that every high school student has access to at least one early post-secondary opportunity. So looking at that list, I'll just start generally. Do we feel pretty comfortable with those?
If we pick 2 and 3, do we get an extra vote?
What about, so let's hear from someone on an item. So I think, Carla, you might have just dropped in the chat that 8 is crucial. Do you want to talk a little bit about 8?
Well, so I was looking at the numbers that were the top choices and I was thinking, yeah, those are all wonderful. And then I started looking at number 8 a little more and I was thinking, well, even that sounds great because having something that's user friendly that outlines the courses that are offered and transferable, it is needed. And I work with students, and I know this is the point that every parent and student gets confused about. So again, all 8 of them actually are great. So, but I know we've got to narrow it down.
Could 8 be an action item of 4? Like 3 was suggested to be an action item of 2, or a
I
version
think
of
that
it.
makes a lot of sense. Absolutely.
So my
I
thought on number 8 is if we do not get something like number 8, and you guys know I get on the soapbox about this, it's my passion to get something that is user friendly, that everyone knows when a student takes this course, whatever course A is, course A would be the same across the board instead of they might take an AP US history and they might take history 108 and they might take history 211. But oh my goodness, all 3 of those are the same thing with 3 different names.
Agree. And Anthony, which did you say you thought maybe that could align with? Did you say 4?
Yeah, number 4, and I agree with Anthony on that one.
When I almost wonder even 6, because really a lot of that is our course catalog that really connects our high schools with our institutions and really aligns with advising.
I agree. And I agree that it is critically important. And I can tell you, the feedback that we get is that kids get to college and the colleges say, oh, that's very nice. Maybe we can apply these towards your electives, but maybe not. And so without any kind of articulation, and as we mentioned on a previous call, there are literally hundreds of articulation agreements that already exist and they're just not cataloged. And kids are really shooting in the dark to some extent, especially if they have an idea of where they want to go to school and what they want to major in. And they're taking these dual credit courses to get ahead of the game. And then they find out they're not. It's not productive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that, and we even hear that from legislators their kids experience the same thing and they're not real happy about it.
At one time we talked about toolkit for students, and I know we have the outreach targeted to underrepresented populations, but I think something in there probably needs to be, it may not even be in here, a real focus of reaching students about the benefits and advantage of taking dual credit.
Mm-hmm.
So, it just looks like that's kind of missing.
This is a little bit of a different approach than the online Common Course catalog, but I became aware of 2 instances that we had this year, particularly related to this, that we were able to fix one and not the other one. The other one involved a private institution. But for all of us that have to sign an agreement in order to receive KIA funds and charge, and agree to charge the certain rate, I just wonder why that can't be a part of that agreement, that the institutions have to agree. And it wouldn't catch everything because there's obviously people who just choose to charge that rate and they don't sign that agreement. But I was surprised that we could receive KIA funds from scholarships, right, for students, and then we could say no to accepting a course from another partner institution. That seems to be something that should be a part of that institutional agreement that we have to sign every year.
The problem is that the right course for the program that the students?
Well, that's true. It doesn't get at that. It does get at the elective credit issue. It doesn't get at the issue of advising and whether or not that course ends up meeting the degree requirement of the program that student gets into, which is a much more, that's right. Current pathways don't resolve that issue. Yeah.
As I mentioned on a previous call, I came from New Jersey a long time ago now, but there they have this NJ transfer database, and it's a comprehensive, pick your program, you pick the school that you're going to be attending, and then pick the school where you want to transfer to, and it will give you a full-blown curriculum of what you need to take. And the same principle applies to these dual credit courses. What you can apply to a program at a given institution. It's been done, is what I'm saying.
I think you all are giving great insight, which I think is really kind of the direction that we were hoping you would go, which is really kind of fleshing out what the action items are for consideration of how we operationalize these recommendations. Again, the prioritized recommendations, as you see and you're finding out, are very broad. So there's lots of details that still can be considered and what they really mean. So I think let's kind of pause on our thoughts on what all could be included in these, but go back to the notion of are we okay with 2, 3, 4, and 6 moving on as our prioritized recommendations? Does anyone have any objections? And again, we're happy to kind of fold in some other of these into those items if that makes sense.
I think, Jennifer, one of the recommendations, at least that popped up in the chat, is that number 3 would actually become an action of number 2. So
Okay.
I'm wondering if we are narrowed
You
down
want to
to
collapse that?
2, 4, and 6. And unless you guys push back against it, that was just a recommendation that popped up in the chat. I didn't know if people saw that or not.
Yeah, I think that would be great. And then we could just add 8.
I have 8 as an action item to number 6, actually.
Oh, well, oh yeah, there you go. So
I got you covered.
one more.
But I want input. That's just what I captured on
No,
conversation verbally and in the chat. But if that's not in alignment with what this team thinks.
Amanda, this is David. I almost clicked on 8, but I didn't know if we were looking at things, if we're looking at our number 1 priorities, number 8 to me is going to be a long game. And I don't know if we want those kinds of things in our early on priorities. That's why I didn't go for it as one of the top 4. And I don't know if that's a consideration for the committee or not.
No, I think your point is well taken, David, and I think it is ongoing. It makes me think back to the days of the course code project, which took a solid 18 months at least, just with the agencies working together. And we have lots of institutions that would have to really collaborate. I think that's why I see it almost as an action, but it is not a short-term goal. I think it's going to have to be something that's initiated and can be done. It just is going to take specific effort and some patience and ongoing updates so it gets into a process. But I'm open to whatever you all recommend on this.
So it sounds like we have several subcategories. I think we go with 2, 4, and 6, and then it looks like we need to pick one more.
Which one had the next highest amount of votes?
So the next one would be number 5. So increase state funding to cover the cost of dual credit tuition and fees and AP exam fees with equity grants for low and middle income students and families. How do we think about that? So perhaps if someone who voted for it, if you could give us kind of your thoughts on why you thought that should be a priority.
I can speak a little bit for that. So that's one of the ones I voted for. And specifically like with AP exam fees, there is a really steep, like, if you get your AP exams waived, like that's great. But if you don't make the cutoff, that is such a jump. Each AP test is $98. And it is highly encouraged a lot of times for students who are trying to get college credit and want to get into schools to be taking like 2 or 3 AP classes a year if they're available at your school, and sometimes even more. Like I know somebody who had like 6 AP classes, and so those tests add up seriously fast. And so I know a lot of people who wouldn't take AP tests and they would just take the class, and then they ended up never getting credit for it. And a lot of times I know for students who want to go out of state, AP classes are the way to go because they're more widely accepted than dual credit classes. So speaking for AP fees, I know that would be something like so many students would think that's huge if they could get those tests covered. And then speaking to like dual credit, like it is awesome that you can get 2 classes paid for, but it's really easy to take 2 dual credit classes in your high school career. So I think that it could, like so many students would see that impact like so quickly. Like it would be something that could really, really shift how many students can get credit for the classes they take and how many students are able to take the classes, as many classes as they want, and really take advantage of what their school has to offer, because there's plenty of schools who offer lots of opportunities, but some students, they just can't take advantage of all of them. So I think that could really help a lot of students. And then speaking like for equity grants, I think it could be really beneficial to have that to help those students who don't quite maybe meet that fee waiver, but still need some help getting funding for those classes.
Thanks, Sophie. That's a great explanation. I might ask if you all are willing, would someone be willing to speak up to maybe why you didn't vote for that one, just so we can hear the opposing view for consideration?
I would certainly like to speak to that. I know sometimes there are schools who offer additional monies and support for students to take as many courses as they want. And what we find, a couple of things, students are taking dual credit courses because they can get them, but they're going into college with a whole bunch of liberal arts courses and maybe not very many math and science. And so they'll start as a sophomore in college and really not have anything to take that first semester except math and science, which they struggled with through high school. And then now that's all they're faced with. They also may be eating up a lot of their electives, and so they don't have that time to explore. So we have to be very cautious in allowing, and I do want to see more courses to be available to students, but I think there has to be a limit of what that looks like, and to ensure that those students are being advised properly. With multiple institutions coming in trying to touch that one student and get their head count, we have to be sure that the student is not harmed, and sometimes they are by taking too many courses, and that the students are on track to earn a credential and not just collect college credit hours.
Good explanation. Thanks, Lord Beth. All right, so on that, I'm going to put you all on the spot, and I'm going to have you vote on whether we keep 5 in our priorities. So if you will, in the chat, either a Y for keeping it or an N for not. And Joette, if you'll kind of tally the Ys and the Ns, I would be very grateful. Give you, let's see. Lord Beth, you're spot on. Advising is crucial throughout this, isn't it? Okay, I think with that, Joette, double check me, but I think the Ys have it. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay, so we are landing on 2, 4, 5, and 6. So that being said, what we're going to do now is break into groups. And Lauren, help me here, because I think we had planned on 3 breakout rooms. What are your suggestions on making this work?
We have Brianna, she can take the 4th.
Oh, awesome, good. Okay, perfect. So we are going to break out into breakout rooms. Joette, so you'll need to add the 4th breakout room for us. Sorry about that. Sorry about putting you on the spot so much today. And what we're going to do, let me see if I can pull up the document that we'll work on, or Lauren, if you are willing. And you're highlighting, sorry. All the things.
Yeah, I'm going to stop sharing for a second and then I can drop it in the chat.
And then pull up the chart. So this is where we're going to make the magic happen, so to speak. So we're going to look at how can we come up with some bold ideas and yet things that are really achievable, so realistic, right? So we want that balance of visionary but realistic and attainable.
Okay, are you ready?
I'm going to have Lauren pull up the chart just so we can kind of briefly talk about it, and then we will absolutely go into our breakout rooms if that's okay. There we go. There we go. So we're going to look at the specific recommendation. We can kind of talk about some of the data that exists around it. And you guys being from the organizations and agencies from which you are, you'll have insight into the existing programs and policies. Certainly, those of us who are facilitating your breakout room will have some ideas just to kind of clarify if there's questions. And then we'll really spend the most of our time in the action step. So that's our key actions. You'll see that action as well as proposed owner. And I think between all of us collectively in those breakout rooms, we'll be able to identify who should own it, as well as a timeline. And some of the timeline may even get into or be tied to the legislative and budgetary implications. So for instance, if we're looking at something that requires a budget ask and can't be implemented until we get that funding, we know, right, we're looking at least after the legislative session. But then tied to that, what are the challenges? So things that kind of, we know it's going to be an issue that we're going to face, we're going to want to document those things as well. So we're trying to get really, the goal of this is to come up with some considerations of what we want the continuum to think about when they're thinking about that priority recommendation. So in other words, they see the recommendation, what's possible considerations of how it could be implemented, what it might look like, who's going to own this timeline, and what the challenges would be. So if that helps kind of frame that for you. So that being said, then we'll have 4 breakout rooms. So breakout room 1 will be centered around that recommendation number 2. Breakout room number 2 will be centered around recommendation number 4. Breakout room 3 will be centered around 5. And breakout room 4 will be centered around 6. And I don't know if it's helpful, Lauren, I hate to ask you to do this one more time, but if you could pull up the numbered list, and then you can self-select what room you would like to go into. So again, room 1 would be recommendation 2 and so forth. So Joette, when you're ready, unless there's any questions, and I'll give it a pause here, we'll kind of move into our groups and really try to flesh out what those action steps would be.
Jennifer, remind me what group I have.
Paul, I think you're stuck with me.
Okay.
And we are, I think, in room 2.
Okay.
Could you remind us to 3 was a part of 2?
Yes, and 3 is going to get collapsed into recommendation number 2.
And 8's collapsed.
8 would go into 6.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank
And
you.
Jennifer, Dr. Glass had asked about timing,
sorry.
about how much time will be in breakout.
Okay, that is a great question. So we will have until, let's see, it looks like we have until 2:45. Double check me, Amanda, is that right?
I think that's right, latest, yeah.
Yep.
Jennifer, I apologize. Would you explain again how we self-select?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's going to be 4 breakout rooms, and they're centered around the recommendations that you'll be able to select. So if you're interested in working on recommendation, oh, we just lost it. Sorry, on recommendation 2, then you would go into breakout room number 1. So if you're interested in working on recommendation number 4, you would go into breakout room 2. If you're interested in recommendation number 5, you'll go in breakout room 3. If you're interested in recommendation number 6, you'll go in breakout room 4. Does that make sense? And hopefully I didn't love that when I was walking through it again. Perfect.
Okay, I've named the room the recommendation numbers.
Oh, thank you, Joette. So she's made it even easier for us.
And the last thing before, Joette, you make it available is if we don't need the full time, we can certainly break
Absolutely.
out earlier, and we will keep in touch by facilitator to see if anyone else is finishing up earlier. We don't want to just sit in a group for the sake of sitting. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Amen.
All right, Joette, I think we're ready. You can scroll to the bottom and you'll see which room to join.
Super.
I just wish you'd move that big rock out from in front of it's putting a glare on the screen.
Okay, I got it.
So as you can tell, Ted is excited about sharing for our group. You all hear the enthusiasm?
And well,
That's his personality type.
turn
I
it
can
over
tell
to
you, he's
you.
like that all the time.
I know. He's like, I guess.
so let's go on and get started, and just do a really brief share out of just kind of what you talked about. This group is highly efficient, and I really appreciate it. So I think we start with number, is it 2, Jen? The person is going to start with recommendation number 2.
I think that's Anthony, that's our group, right? I can go ahead and get us started, but please layer in. We were a mighty team of 3 with myself, Dr. Brewer, and Anthony doing all of the hard work. So hopefully we got as far along as the other groups that had some more brain power behind them. But we started with taking the recommendations of the group just to refine the recommendation itself. And so we made sure to add that it's not only about ensuring that every high school student has access to at least one EPO course, but that they also have the support to successfully complete the course. So hopefully that captures the group's feedback, and then incorporated the kind of sub recommendation around providing incentives for high school teachers to teach EPO courses, broaden that beyond dual credit, and then also providing professional development and opportunities to participate in professional networks. So really getting at the teacher capacity element. And I think that's where we spent most of our time. We started to identify what some additional existing programs might be. I think our big takeaway was that there are lots of localized opportunities to build teacher capacity, but there is a real opportunity to provide a more statewide approach around doing so. And so we mapped out a handful of action steps related to that, including we ended at talking about what the best mechanics might be for dedicating funding for whether it's graduate coursework or professional development for AP teachers. And so have a couple of different ideas there and some next steps for us to be able to learn, for example, how stipends get paid out for national boards, or how tuition remission works for other kind of opportunities into educators' hands to get them kind of qualified to teach. Things that we also have in our list that we need to map out what the specific action steps are were kind of other elements of access. I think we identified funding is key, teacher capacity is key, but there are other things that kind of restrict students from having access to EPO courses. And so we said those include things like the expectations and mindsets of adults. And so thinking about professional development opportunities there, scheduling conflicts that districts might have and being able to offer courses, and then getting into that support piece around how to bolster advising, which we're hoping some of the other groups mapped out some specific action steps around there, but we can build that out as well. Anthony, anything you'd add to that?
I think that was well said.
Right. Everything that I shared is straight from Anthony, so he gets all of the kudos there.
Great, thank you. Let's hop to number 4, recommendation number 4.
So recommendation number 4 was targeting proactive outreach to students and families who have been traditionally underrepresented in early post-secondary opportunities. And Paul and I had the pleasure of working with the very intense Ted and Jenny, but they came up with some great ideas. So Ted, I'm gonna let you share for us.
Okay, now help me out, Jennifer. I see the document. I'm looking on it and it's not popping up.
Do you see where it says recommendation number 2, or is it not coming up at all?
Not coming up at all.
Okay, no worries. I've got you, Ted.
I will say we focused on marketing campaigns and
Yeah, I'll let you if you want to just talk briefly about it, and I'll fill in as you go.
yeah. No, I mean, we talked about marketing campaigns, connecting with schools. We also thought too, it'd be good to have, and maybe it is, the high schools already have this, but some kind of reporting about how many graduating seniors are taking dual credit. And maybe colleges also ought to record or have a metric that says, you know, how many entering students have taken dual credit courses, or not dual credit, but EPO courses as part of their entering class. Talked about connecting with community-based organizations. I mean, one of the questions we're kind of bouncing around was, is this a lack of information on students, or were they not eligible to participate? And they kind of need answers, obviously, for those questions. Concerns about the resource issue from a school counselor or representatives at schools for doing that counseling piece. Feel like it's, you know, obviously needed. All right, Jennifer, what else have I got?
No, you got it. And Ted volunteered Kia for taking the lead on a toolkit. Just kidding, but really they talked a lot about the need for a toolkit focused in both on community members, parents, students, but then a separate one for schools, really emphasizing the importance that our counselors, in terms of capacity and time, it can't all fall on them. So that this would be a big kind of underlying effort of all the work.
And we have the capacity to do that work. We have a publications area that specializes in interfacing with students and parents and administrators. So no problem. How's that?
There you go. Wow. I was kidding, but that's amazing. So look, you all have been
well, I mean,
successful at getting things to happen.
it's accurate.
There you go. All right,
That's
Amanda.
great.
So that's
All right.
recommendation number 4.
Fantastic, thank you. And that's exciting. Already action coming out. That's fantastic. Recommendation number 5, I'm going to turn it to Sophie because we are going to utilize Sophie and her brain right up until she moves on Saturday to Vandy. So Sophie, I'll let you give an overview of what we did today.
Okay, so our recommendation was to increase state funding to cover the cost for early post-secondary opportunities for all students. So we changed the wording of that a little bit to make it a little bit more broad to kind of incorporate all options that students have. Because originally it was just dual credit and AP exams, and we wanted to make that so that funding can go to anything. Because I believe it was Melina pointed out several instances where that could be really helpful for students. And with equity grants for low and middle income students and families. So we had several action items. One of ours was the possible funding that would charge students a minimal fee for AP exams. So I believe Stacy said that there's going to be federal funding for AP exams laid out. So utilizing those funds to put it towards students and having messaging around it, because that's an issue that we can run into with there not being any awareness of that these funds exist and that we can use them for students.
And it's state dollars, just FYI, state, not federal.
Yes, sorry.
No worries.
Yeah, anybody else jump in, because I learned a whole lot in this group at once. So our next action item was to use data to identify populations to target support for equitable opportunities to access EPOs. And that was going to belong to KDE, KY Stats, and WICHE. And so kind of utilizing those databases to identify where this should be going to, where this should be going. We also talked about using the Title I metric to determine the need, using per pupil amount and additional funds determined for the population that qualifies for Title I, and potentially with that having qualifiers for how the funds can be used and directing certain amounts of the funds to certain EPO groups. And that was going to be belonging to the LEAs and KDE. And our next action item was the College Board providing support to help assist LEAs to identify and support students in accessing and succeeding in EPOs and post-secondary transitions. So that looked like webinars, and that would involve College Board, Advanced Kentucky, KDE, and CPE. And our last action item was state funding for employer partners to host and support interns and workplace-based learning. And so allocating funds not just to those students, but also towards those organizations or companies that students are working for to make sure that they can actually support these students. And that was going to be along to the Kentucky Chamber and those specific employers. So we then kind of talked a little bit more about those budget implications and our potential challenges. And we think it's mainly going to align as a budgetary request and not necessarily any sort of legislative action. And then we had several potential challenges that we could run into. One of those is care surrounding the language about target groups, because and leading into one of our other challenges, the tension is kind of high in the education community. And so we want to avoid things that kind of hint on critical race theory and avoiding that altogether. Also just being intentional about the language that we use and how we use it to get funding. Also making sure the message is around sustainability and not just using like our ESSER funds and stuff to go towards this, that we want it to be a long-term program. And intentional messaging about the access of funds and being aware of how we are determining need for the equity grants and how that is being distributed. We also talked about potentially with having qualifiers for how that money can be spent, some issues with isolating schools because they only have certain EPOs available and they may not be eligible for all the funds, and also schools who are already paying for some of this that it could be going towards and how that will work out. And then we also briefly talked about how advising is really critical, and we didn't put that as a specific action item because we knew that some of the other groups were kind of talking about that. And so just like professional development and making sure that when we have these increasing opportunities, like Laura Beth pointed out, that we're not just getting students accumulating a ton of credits that ultimately kind of puts them in a backward position. So anybody else from our group, feel free to jump in, please.
That was fantastic, Sophie. You covered it well. And let's round out with recommendation number 6.
Yeah, I will take it away, but other people, please feel free to jump in. So we were talking about strengthening partnerships among high schools, institutions, and the workforce to expand access, advising, and support. So the first action item that we discussed and that we think makes sense as a first step is to convene regional focus groups in order to connect information among K-12, in particular college and career readiness coaches, higher education, and workforce representatives. We talked a lot about the importance of making sure that these groups and that the information that we gather and share is really region specific. And so leveraging the educational co-ops as much as possible to help with this first step, and a couple of our others as well. We also talked about the Dual Credit Advisory Council that used to exist but hasn't been meeting for a while. So reconvening that we think is a good step, and also they can help with a lot of this, with a lot of these other action steps, and maybe expanding that too to be beyond just dual credit, but early post-secondary opportunities as a whole. We want to, I'm going to jump around a little bit. But we talked about the importance of having consistent messaging and creating some sort of tool that just outlines like what are the specific, like overarching steps that students need to do if they want to take AP, dual credit, IB courses. So like 1, you need to have good grades early on and make sure you're doing well in your classes. 2, you need to talk to your counselor if you're interested in participating in these opportunities. 3, you might need to apply. So if you're doing dual credit, you will have to apply, but for AP, you don't technically need to apply. You just need to talk to your counselor. So some sort of tool that outlines for students, like here are the steps, and then also creating a more customizable version of that districts can then go in and input the specifics for their district and for their higher ed partners, who are the contacts and what are the steps that need to be taken. So a couple ideas on how that can get started and who can own that work. We also talked about creating, when creating these resources and identifying best practices that are already going on in different regions, making sure that we're sharing that down to our regional co-ops and then from there into specific school districts. And then we talked quite a bit about that course catalog, which we said sort of folded in under this priority. So creating some sort of EPO course catalog to show what courses are available and how will they transfer to different institutions. We talked a little bit again about the NewJerseyTransfer.org as like a good model to use. And then I think it was Dr. Wilson brought up that Kentucky used to have something about Know How to Go that she used to use a lot, and like figuring out how classes would transfer to different institutions, but that has not been maintained. So we do have like some starting infrastructure there. So using that to build out this course catalog, this, as we all discussed as a group, is going to be a longer term goal. But it's something that we want to start on early. And it's also going to be something that needs to continuously be maintained and updated.
Yeah, I just want to add that Know How to Go is a CPE website, but apparently it hasn't been updated in a while. And it really takes work to interface with the colleges to do that. Maybe CPE isn't the right place for that to be housed.
Actually, we're getting ready to enter into agreement with KY Stats and KDE and hopefully others to relaunch a more comprehensive. So it's not just CPE alone, but it is more robust and updated.
That's great.
Yeah, thanks.
That's great to know. And then along with that, a couple other tools we discussed, such as like what are just general courses students can take with dual credit that will meet their gen eds wherever they go in the state. And then finally, we can't just create this course catalog. We need to make sure that we're communicating with students and educating them on how they can use this to help with their post-secondary planning. And thinking that this is mostly going to fall as sort of a agency ask with probably some budgetary ask as well. It's going to cost money to like build this tool and to maintain it. So thinking that it's mostly a budgetary ask, but we didn't get into a ton of the specifics on that. Anything else from our group that I missed? All right, well, that's it then.
Okay, so I was checking our time. So we are doing fantastic. So next steps for us is that we will take your feedback today. And as Jennifer had said in the comments, a lot of these are crossing over. And so of course we will be efficient and not have repetitive actions, but really bring them together. And then we will also take them back to, of course, Dr. Glass is on the call, but Dr. Glass, Lieutenant Governor Coleman, and Dr. Thompson to really look and to see what those actions would be before going to the continuum, to see if there's anything that's duplicative or of concern or anything like that, because we don't want to take anything forward that folks would be like, whoa, wait a minute, we would never support that. So we want to make sure that, like we said, it's bold, but yet obtainable. And so I think we've accomplished our goal here today, as Dr. Glass started and Dr. Sarpaza but about, can we get this done without the September meeting? I think we can. If we have any bumps in the road when we're pulling the notes together, we will reach out by email, or if we feel like we need to come back together to do this, we can. But I really think what you gave us today was excellent and really actionable with specific next steps and what it would entail. And so now we have our work cut out for us to follow through, pull it together, meet with the co-leads of the coalition, or the, continuum. I've got all kinds of words in my head. Well, I'm sorry, there's no air conditioning on my side. I'm a little warm. And then we will do our continuum meeting in September. Please, though, hang on to both dates. If we're going to cancel, we will let you know. And we definitely want to come back together in October for follow-up next steps and where we go from here. And so I really appreciate today. I will stop and let our two co-leads do a final thank you. Jen, is there anything else I've forgotten next step wise?
No, and I'll just throw out the dates just as a primer, and we'll make sure that Joette sends these out to you as well, but are tentatively, right? But because you guys are rock stars, hopefully we won't need to meet, just to save you the time. September 22nd at 1 p.m. Is when we tentatively had scheduled. So if we don't meet, then our next meeting would be October 13th at 1 p.m. Eastern, just so you have that on your radar. And just as a reminder, as Amanda mentioned, the continuum does come together as the full body in September on the 23rd. So as always, you're welcome to watch that. It's at 1 p.m. It is live streamed. That is when these recommendations and those action steps will be shared with the full continuum, and they'll be discussing them if you'd like to kind of tune into those conversations. But in the meantime, we'll continue to populate your Google folder for August meeting resources, so you've got access to all that information as well. So with that, Commissioner, and President Zarpata, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, we'll be brief. Just thanks so much, everybody. Really enjoyed the conversation. We covered a lot of ground, and we are pointing towards some really thoughtful and I think will be impactful recommendations. So we appreciate everybody's time that you've invested, and we're moving forward. Paul.
Yes, thanks, everybody. I know carving 2 hours out of an afternoon in late August for most of us is terribly difficult, but I really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.